Coming up on the Mind Caddie.
Ultimately, for me, the number one thing to develop real skill is that this golf club literally becomes an extension of your body.
I don't know who I'm trying to impress by smashing a driver because it says I should, or not using my wrists for chipping. Right, at the end of the day, if it works for me.
Again, I think some amazing things can happen when you focus on developing skills, not just working on swings. It comes down to how is your brain perceiving the game of golf?
Mind Caddie.
Well, hello everyone. Slightly different voice starting off today's show because we have a special one, which is the 400th episode of the Mind Caddie podcast. So we thought what would be interesting is to flip the mic over and that I will interview Karl. So welcome, Karl, to your own show.
Feels very surreal, this, Ben, and a bit strange. I'm a bit anxious about how it'll all go. It's much easier asking questions than answering them, but let's see how we get on.
Right, should we just dive in with some questions straight on?
Yep, carry on.
Right, okay. So I'm going to use my handy notes. So first question, after working with some of the best players in the world, what do great players understand about the mental side of golf that most amateurs always miss?
I would say that's the biggest misconception, Ben, really, that the great players necessarily understand more about the mental game than club players. Some do, obviously, but I think, in my kind of experience of working with them over the past 25, 30 years or so, you get the same neurosis, you get the same sort of issues with overthinking with good players as you do with club players. And I think it reinforces that we're still relatively in the infancy of understanding a bit more about our brain and how our brain works and how it interacts and with our golf. But I think that's where, hopefully what we've talked about for the last few years is the massive opportunity that to work on your mental game. Essentially, I think the ones who do make the breakthroughs and do get the best out of their abilities start to see that it's very much about developing a resilient mind, whereby you're literally prepared to deal with anything that comes along. We talked about when you did the sort of slot with me, we talked about the importance of acceptance. And, whilst everybody's heard it before and they've read about it and things like that, to set out on a year and, work systematically on your levels of acceptance. And it's not about feeling happy about a bad shot or anything like that. It's getting to the point where I think fundamentally, what would my view on acceptance be? Why is it so important? It's so important because when you're prepared to accept any outcome, the amount of threat that there is in your brain for the golf course, for the surroundings, reduces. And when that reduces, then you can start to swing more freely. And if you can swing more freely, then you're accessing your skills, you're accessing what you currently possess. We've never, with the Mind Caddie, we've never promised to give somebody something that somebody hasn't got. If you've got no skills whatsoever, you're going to need to work on that. But, there's so many folk out there who see the skills improve and they've worked well with a coach, but they're not accessing those skills. And I think that's where this is hopefully it's a fascinating area to look at of what do I do to actually get better at accessing my abilities.
So then as a scenario, as a golfer, as someone who obviously does work on their mental game as well, I'm playing all right. I then hit a really bad tee shot. Let's say I just hit a mega slice or massive hook. It's very easy to just go, well, it was definitely the swing. Right. Yeah. And I think I'm still guilty of it. And I guess, how do you sort of educate golfers that obviously something was wrong with the swing, but don't get fixated on a bad swing and obviously then let it affect the next shot and the next shot after that?
I think first on that, and I think it'd be a great golden rule for everybody this year, make a firm commitment that you're going to play golf and you're not going to react to an individual shot. You're going to look for patterns. Because the thing is, on an individual shot, I'll go on a golf course with people all the time and they'll hit it 50 yards right, 60 yards left, and they'll turn to me and say, what did I do there? And I'm honest enough to shrug my shoulders and say, I've got no idea. Because there's not enough information on one shot How many things can influence a club being very closed or very open? Many things, you've increased tension, thinking too much about the swing. There's a whole bunch of things that can cause an individual shot. Whereas if you promise yourself to go out on the course and look for patterns, not shots, then if you come off at the end of the day and 7 tee shots have gone left and you're hitting your irons a little bit heavy most of the time, that's a pattern. Then you can firmly say, well, it's clear that the face is shut through the swing. Something's going on that's closing my club face at impact, or with my irons, something's happening where the low point's behind the ball or whatever. But I think to just cut yourself some slack this year and commit to not reacting to shots, as hard as it is to an individual shot, look for patterns. What you get a lot better at is then dealing with the variety of outcomes that there is on a golf course, because we've seen it with the very best players in the world. All of a sudden, for no reason, Rory will block 150 yards right, or he'll snap up one or whatever. And that's the best of the best on TV at the best, and they still hit it sideways from time to time. So why the hell do we think at 10, 15, 20 handicap that we should be exonerated from that? So long-winded answer to a good question is I think gain perspective on the fact that the club face can be closed or open, and you hit it off the toe or the heel, or you catch the ground or whatever on any individual shot. But if you promise yourself to look for patterns, I think you'll be far more efficient on the course. But then I think you're going to work better with your pro, because I think if you can go to your pro and you're teaching pro and say, it's clear, last few rounds, this is a clear pattern. Shots are going left, shots are going right, shots are off the toe, shots are off the heel. Then I think it's a great collaboration then with pro and student.
And yeah, I mean, and just to plug the app, I know there's a great lesson there which you did, which is react or respond, which is all around that. And I guess patterns is interesting, because I say that I think for me as well, the first skill you can build is not reacting to that one shot, as you say, and I guess then the next step on beyond that is, if I have just one bad round, let's just say in I hit 7 left, and that's just an awful round, is that really enough to? Because then the immediate thought is, well, I'm off to the range, I'm off to see a coach. Whereas actually, you sort of said it then, but should you be really looking for patterns over 3, 4, 5 rounds rather than just reacting to that one round?
Yeah, I think in an ideal world, definitely, because you've hit it left all day. That could be the fact you only had 2 hours sleep the night before, or you've just had a 300-mile journey in a car, and you're really stiff in your hips. There's a myriad of things that can cause it to go left. I think human nature, Ben, when you've hit a bunch of hooks or pushes or slices or whatever, is to want to aim to go and work at the range. And I think most people, if they notice a pattern on the golf course and then they go to the range, if you stick within the big 3, that Adam Young has talked so much about, we've had him on the podcast previously, and I think is such an important thing, that the big 3 of club face orientation, strike location, and then ground contact or low point, I think you're going to get much, much better at adjusting to whatever it is that's going on in your swing. Because the one thing's for certain is, if you've been playing golf for a while, you're going to have tendencies. You can look at any player in the world, and any player has tendencies. And I think the best players just manage their tendencies. You can see Scheffler doing it so well on the course. There'll be some funky looking finishes to some of his swings. He's trying to play a fade most of the time. And I think he's so aware of that club face, not consciously, but he's so aware of that club face through the way he trains and the way he practices. He can sense at a deep level if that face is coming in a little bit too close relative to trying to play a fade. He's able to save it at impact. And saving it gets a bad rap. It's as though we should never do that. Well, every swing you're saving it to a degree, because it's a coordination of a lot of moving parts where you're trying to organize a club head swinging at 100 plus miles an hour. So I think, back to your question, on an individual round, if there is a pattern, go to the range, focus on the big 3, at the range. And I think more often than not, you'll get back on track pretty quickly. We're very good. I think the brain's very good at fixing problems if it's very clear on what the problem is. I think we're terrible if we're not sure on what the problem is. And I think that's where, unfortunately, with instruction, there's so much information about the form of the swing. You know, you should be doing this with your swing plane, you should be doing this with your legs and the ground and all the rest of it. There's this huge, massive information, which may or may not be appropriate. But the only thing that we know for certain is there's one time and one time alone when the golf ball gets told what to do, and that's impact. And if you're not homing in on impact and what your impact conditions are and your impact tendencies, I think you're very much in the wrong place.
That kind of leads into a question that was asked quite a lot, which is, whilst this is going to be individual based on whatever your problem or you're working on, what do you see as a good training practice session? How, you know, what should the structure look like, rather than, as we know, just get to the bottom range and bashing 100 balls?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's different at different times of year. I think there's some great stuff that can be done in the winter time, which hopefully we're moving out of now. But I think in the winter time, there is definitely time and place for looking at your fundamental movement patterns. You know, I was in Denmark a few weeks ago. The PGA out there asked me to go out there, and so impressed with their coaches. And you see how many good players are coming from Denmark, you know, a country that they can only play golf 5 or 6 months of the year. You know, he said, why are they producing these great players with these fantastic looking golf swings? And I think the fact that they're indoors, and they have to be indoors for a few months in the winter, and they know there's no option of going on the golf course, that's a great time to work on the sort of overall movements that you're making in the swing. I think for most of us who are playing now and hopefully moving into the season, if you're going to go and play golf, the big question for me whenever you go and play is, if you're going to warm up, is what have I got today? We love this idea of consistency. We love the idea of a repeating golf swing. Well, in 30 years, I've never had anybody come to me and say, I'm getting really bored with golf because it's the same every day and my swing fit's the same every day. I mean, even the best players in the world, there's huge variety. So I think first of all, going to the range and noticing, what have you got? You know, does it tend to be fading? Is it drawing a little bit? Are you pulling it? Are you pushing it? And rather than then wishing for what you hope to have or you'd like to have, I think he's really being disciplined at starting to get the best out of what you've got. And we've talked about this before, and I think the real skill is if you feel like you've got your C game, you know, there's a bit of variation going on there, that you go on the golf course and you make C game decisions. You don't have your C game and then go on the golf course and make A game decisions where you're going for everything and you can think you can thread it through the eye of a needle and all the rest of it. And patently that's not going to happen. And I think that again is true accessing of skill, in the sense that knowing what you have on any given day and then being able to go out there and get the best out of it. I think as you move into the season, in terms of training sessions, I think again, to harp on about the big three, it should be more around that when you're actually training, whereby, you know, we've done this before and we've talked about this before, as something as simple as a dot on the club face. Now that dot on the club face can pretty much explain everything that happens in golf. Any shot that you don't like, you can relate it to this. If it's going off to the right, the dot's arriving late. If it's going to the left, the dot's arriving early. The dot might be too high. The dot might be too low in terms of the strike. So I think really, really tuning into that, you know, and I'm a big fan that, you know, if you can deliberately present the dot a little bit late and you can deliberately present it a little bit early, you can certainly find the middle ground. You know, the brain is phenomenal at solving that problem and learning through error. You know, I think we have I certainly did. I had such a bad relationship to error when I played. And all I wanted to do was just hit good shots, because I believe that good shots would make me feel confident. Well, that theory is okay until you get on the range and hit a bad one. and then it's like, well, where do we go from there, kind of thing. So I think, being on the range and being prepared to sort of be okay with error and explore what the club face is doing and things like that. Ultimately, for me, the number one thing to develop real skill is that this golf club literally becomes an extension of your body, so that there's such an awareness of what that face is doing. It's literally like you're aware of the club face in the way that you'd be aware of the palm of your right hand or the back of your left hand or whatever. And I think with so many people are so far away from that because they're trying to execute positions, and I think we love these days symmetrical swings. We love looking at beautiful swings on video and things like that. And whilst all that's very nice, the swing isn't the skill. I think that's a massive, massive point. The swing isn't the skill. You can have a much better looking golf swing. Guys who've been on the podcast like John Dunnigan and Adam Young again have talked about this. You can actually improve the movements that you make in your swing, but it doesn't necessarily reflect in the skill of improving your impact.
I mean, the golf industry is funny, isn't it? Because, Adam Scott for years is just, the dream swing. Everyone wants it. But when was the last time he won?
Yeah.
And that's funny, isn't it? As an industry, we all go for it's got to look like this, playing 1, 2, 3, whatever. But actually, it doesn't translate to Scotty Scheffler, who's probably doing good for the game. Is that, as you say, he does all sorts of quirky stuff with his feet, with his arms, but look at him.
Yeah. We'd all like to look like Adam Scott for a number of reasons, not just golf swing reasons, I suppose. But yeah, Adam Scott's been a great player. But if it was just about golf swing, he would have won 20 majors. As you say, it's such a beautiful motion. And then you mentioned Scotty, and we've already touched on it. This idea of being able to save shots, it's just given such a bad rap in golf. But that is a brain that's working perfectly. There was a great story about going back to kind of my era and before, Jack Nicklaus. One of the most famous shots in golf when he hit the flag in the US Open at Pebble Beach on the 17th, I think with a 1 iron or a 2 iron in those days, back in the early 70s, but in 1972. And everybody talked about what this great shot that he'd hit. And when Nicklaus was asked about it, he said it couldn't have been further from the truth. He said it was an awful swing. He said, but I could sense I was out of position, and then I just managed to save it at the last minute and managed to hit a shot. And I think we can miss things like that. We can miss gems like that, whereby, we're not saying how you swing it doesn't matter. What we are saying is if your mind-body system is quiet enough for you to be more aware of the club and what the club's doing, you'd be surprised about how many shots you can actually produce. The classic one with club players is that, you get them in trouble and they're in the trees, or they've got to hit it low or bend it or whatever. And it's amazing how adept even relatively high handicappers can be at that shot, at those shots, because they're so clear on what they have to do with the shot. They get a sense of what they perhaps need to do with the club to do that. And it's amazing how many times they bring that off. And they're probably not thinking too much about the swing in those situations. They're thinking much more about the shot, as opposed to this idea of, does the shot create the swing or does the swing create the shot?
I think unfortunately we chase perfection, right? That's kind of what it's like. Yeah, I've hit the perfect swing, which was the perfect outcome for the perfect shot. Every hole, where I think obviously, what was it, Tiger Woods famously said, I think he only played 4 perfect rounds, something ridiculous like that. He's like, I was always fighting something, and you just got, as you said, just made do with what I had. But one of the things you taught me once, I don't know if it was in a private conversation when I was struggling at some point, which was, and me, and most people do, is that I like data. I like technology in golf to a certain extent, and we might touch on that in a second, which is, but you said, like, if I go to the range or I have a TrackMan or something like that, play the game with it, which is play around with the big 3, i.e. face, especially the face. And then, but before you look at the monitor, you guess what the result was. And it was funny because it does, couple of things is you over exaggerate, which is, as again, what you taught is a good thing to know what a completely wide open face feels like. And obviously
Yeah.
you find the middle ground, but it really does hone your skills to then use the data, because you feel that it was mega open, and then it might tell you, well, actually it was only slightly open. And I think what you said was the most important thing, is that you guess first. And I think that's a really good thing for people who, like the Trackmans and all that sort of stuff, is a really good game to do.
Do you know, Ben, it's massive, that really. And I think that's where you can really gain the benefit of technology. If technology enhances your feel and enhances your awareness, then it's a marvelous thing. Unfortunately for most people, it's doing the opposite. It's clouding or cloaking awareness and feel, because what most people are doing is they hit a shot and immediately look at the launch monitor, and there's a sea of numbers up there, and there's nothing going on in terms of a learning experience with that. But as you say, if you can hit a shot, let's say you're working on club face, and you hit 10 shots, just do that exercise where you just hit the shot and you guesstimate what that club face is going to be. Is it positive or negative? Is it open or closed? Is the dot early or late? Make that estimation, and then actually look at your launch monitor, see if it's back in. So is your feel close to the reality of the game? And I'm sure you found it, and most people would. At first, it's miles out. What you're feeling is happening is actually miles out. But as you narrow that gap. The other interesting thing with I think with technology, and Gary Nicol made this really clear for me a long time ago, that people think that the golf swing has dramatically changed when they hit a bad shot. But if you look at it on TrackMan or GC Quad or whatever, there's obviously exceptions to everything that I'm going to say, but a lot of golfers, the path of the swing is relatively stable. It won't vary that much. But what is incredibly variable is the club face. Now, we think we've made a dramatically different golf swing because the ball's gone 30, 40 yards left or right. Very often that's the brain making up a story after the incident. That I must have thrown it from the top, or I must have done this or that, or whatever we think, is the reason. When actually, the ball before it, your path was 2 degrees to the left. This one's 2 degrees to the left, but there's maybe 5 degrees difference in what the club face is doing. So the actual gross movements haven't changed that much, but the micro movements are changing, or can be changing dramatically from shot to shot. So I think if you're using technology to bridge that gap between feel and real, that's fantastic. If you're using technology just to hit a shot and then look at it, I think that's probably the worst possible thing that you could be doing.
I actually saw a video on, I don't know if it's Instagram or YouTube the other day with, I know we keep talking about, but Scotty Scheffler and Nelly Korda, and they were asked about, TrackMan, and both of them said, I use it as a reference point. I don't use it religiously because it gets rid of my feel and my creativity. And I think, not to put ourselves in those brackets, but I think that is the way to look at it. Use it for training, because I think the beauty of the range is you can go absolutely wild and spray it because there are no consequences to learn the feelings. Whereas obviously then you don't want to be going out on a golf course and just spraying it as far. But I think that is the best way to use it. And then the other topic I think was interesting, which people have asked, and actually I was having a conversation with he owns an app called Driven, which we've spoken about before, which is all about the fitness side of it. And how do you feel about distance, swing speed, and obviously Bryson started all with just smack it as far as you can, and therefore, and Scott Fawcett decades just hit driver everywhere. Yep. How do you feel about that versus, I guess, maybe this what would be seen as, no disrespect, a slightly more old school approach, which is, strategically just hit an iron off the tee, put it in play. Where do you feel that is at the moment?
Yeah. I mean, I think a couple of things on that. And you mentioned the fitness side of it. What I'm a lot clearer of now in the last couple of years, having done a lot of work with Chris Finn at Par for Success, is that if you were just out there and you think, great, I'm I'm going to get X system or Y system to try and hit it further. I'm going to increase my club head speed, and all you're doing is just trying to, overtrain and overspeed training and all that kind of stuff. As Chris made it clear to me, you're literally, especially if you're in your 40s and your 50s, you're an injury waiting to happen. Just by working on speed alone can be dangerous. I think if I had my time again, in terms of playing, I would put much more emphasis on physical screening and understanding how my body moves first and foremost, and the work that you can do on that. Because again, how many people are trying to put the club in positions and do things in the swing that they're just physically not capable of doing? However, when you get your body moving more efficiently, it's amazing how golf swings can improve as a result of that. I think in terms of hitting driver, as you say, the Fawcett stuff, the decade stuff is pretty clear on it. It is a big advantage to knock it out there and smash it out there. But I think, it comes back to, I was doing a seminar the other day with a group of pros, and I said, in this game, we love absolutes. Everybody loves the idea of this is the way to do it. We get arguments about pitching, chipping, should it be steep angle of attack? Should it be more shallow? Should you use the bounce? Should you not use the bounce? And we get people completely on one side or the other, when, if there's one thing I kind of understand for me after all these years now, that golf's a study of one, in the sense that we can look at other people and it's interesting. But there's a slide I always put up in presentations, and it's from a kind of hero of mine from when I was a kid, Bruce Lee, famous martial artist, but a philosopher and a great researcher on skill development. And he said the number one thing that you need to do, whatever endeavor it is, whether it's martial arts, whether it's golf, whether it's business, is research your own experience. And as simple as that sounds, I don't think we research our own experience. I think we, hopefully with the Mind Caddie, what we are doing with folk is sharing information and sharing ideas and sharing sort of approaches. But I do think the core message is that you need to personalize it, and you need to, research what you do in certain situations. So, on your golf course, that somebody says, well, it should always be driver here. Well, that's fine according to the statistics, but the statistics don't ask you how do you feel. On a given moment at a given time somewhere, if for whatever reason you stand on a tee and you feel horrible with a driver in your hand, and you feel like you can get it on the golf course with a rescue, I know what I'd sort of do in that situation. I know the statistics are saying, all things being equal, all averages balanced out, that you're better off hitting driver here, and we're trying to take some emotion out of it. But we can't take all the emotion out of it, and we're dealing with human beings, and we're dealing with brains that remember bad experiences from the past and things like that. And sometimes you just got to get the job done, haven't you? And whether that's getting the job done to break 100, get your handicap down to 5, or win a club championship or win a major, sometimes it's just about getting the job done in a certain situation with, how am I feeling right now? And then we've talked about this in the app, WIN, win. What's important now? What's important now is we just find the fairway. At another point in the round, what's important now is to, bomb it out there and get it as close as you can to a par 4, and do all of those things that we know statistically are the best things to do. But the ultimate skill for me, and this is where I'm working with players individually, is the ultimate skill is adaptability, is being able to adapt to whatever you've got physically and mentally on a given day, and still find a way of getting the best out of yourself.
Yeah, I think that's so important, actually. How do you feel? Because let's be honest, if you were to ask every golfer now, if you stood on a tee with a driver in your hand, feeling uncomfortable, how many times do you actually then deliver the great shot, or how many times do you actually end up spraying it all over the place? Because if you're not feeling comfortable with it, unlikelihood is you're not going to deliver it. But there's a couple of things that you always teach as well, which is don't find the way, find your way. And on a personal level for me, one was always chipping around the green. The amount of instruction videos and tips and stuff about, how to deliver the club. I tried it for so long practicing it, but I could never find, the right way. And I sort of became a bit robotic. And I know this isn't technically right, but I just found I was so much better feeling it if I was just using quite a bit of wrist, which
Right.
I know technically they go, well, you're going to be inconsistent if you use your wrist more than keeping it. But again, it goes
Says
completely
who?
against it.
Says who?
But well, yeah, and then I also kind of learned over the years, it's like, so what? Like, if that's the way it works for me, that's the way it works for me. I don't know who. And to your point about the driver, I don't know my ego. I don't know who I'm trying to impress by smashing a driver because it says I should, or not using my wrists for chipping. Like, at the end of the day, if it works for me.
What you just said there with chippings, so important that ultimately what are you trying to do to be good at chipping? You're trying to get a reasonably stable way of interacting with the ground, getting the club to interact with the ground. Now, for whatever reason, if you can interact with the ground fairly regularly and fairly consistently, feeling like you're using your wrists, well, that seems to be researching your experience. That seems to be the way for you. But I think we're just so enthralled or entrapped by absolutism. This is the way to do it. It's got to be this kind of release or that kind of release. And, whilst there are physics, laws of physics and geometry about what we're trying to do, there's a couple of really good coaches out there on the short game. And, I've heard them say that, it depends in terms of the individual, but as long as you're getting that golf club to interact with the ground and, the low point isn't too deep after the ball and things like that, that is what matters. It's not right, you've got to be fixed with this particular technique. It's actually comes back to, as boring as it sounds, is what is this implement, this tool in your hand doing when it interacts with the golf ball or the ground.
Yeah, as you say, you just got to go out and practice it, like just go out and play and experiment, right? Research, find out what works for you.
And I think that's what we've hopefully put forward in the Mind Caddie a lot, and as well with this, is that it's also realizing that, when you go and play golf, we're not looking for this kind of like Buddha-like state where you're just all at one with the universe and you've got no negative thoughts and you're breathing slowly and all the rest of it. That's nice when it happens, but that's not our experience most of the time. For whatever reason today, you might be agitated. For whatever reason today, you may, I've spoken to so many good players, and the number of times I've heard them say, I was with a guy a couple of weeks ago, a really good player. He's won in Europe a few times. And he said, I just got up at the second round. He said, I don't know why. He said, I felt really, really nervous. He said, there was no reason, but I just felt really nervous. But, it was great to hear him say, I actually didn't fight it. I didn't resist it. I just thought, well, there's a lot of energy in my body today. There's a lot of thoughts passing through my mind. I don't have to take it quite so seriously. I can still come back to, what am I trying to get the golf ball to do? What shot am I trying to play? And I think that's such a strong message for the season ahead that, this year when anybody plays, there'll be times when you feel great, but it doesn't guarantee good shots. And there'll be times when you'll feel uncomfortable, nervous, anxious, a busy mind, but you can still hit good shots even in the presence of those things if you're able to stay with the task. I mean, you talked about that when we did the other interview.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably the biggest skill you can develop, right? Is just dealing with what you've got. And I think one of the other question that keeps coming up, which sort of leans into this, which is a lot of golfers, and I think this is probably where they start exploring the mental side as well, is they know they're capable of more, and I think it seems to be a bit of a theme from some data that we have in the app, which is golfers feel they're capable of more, but whether it's the round's going well and then the sun brain goes, oh, well, if I keep this up for 18, I'm going to do this, blah, blah, blah. But a lot of golfers feel stuck, that they feel like, maybe they've been stuck on the same handicap or shooting low 80s and they just can't break through into the, high 70s or whatever. or the other way around. It was like, what do you sort of say to people out there who know they've probably got more in them but are struggling, maybe have hit a plateau?
What I would say is if you're struggling with the game, change the game. And that might sound flippant, but what I mean by that is we have a collective belief that when we go out, that we're playing golf over 18 holes and there's 2 sets of 9 and we're trying to shoot low on each set of 9 and add it all up at the end. That's the belief that we're given, that that's the game of golf. That's just an abstract notion that we've all bought into. It could be that you sort of think, actually, that model isn't working for me. You know, famously, I remember meeting Rudy Duran, Tiger's first coach in China years ago, and he talked about what they did with Tiger as a young kid, and they spent loads of time on the golf course, and they created. It's you know, people have heard this before, but I think it's relevant, so relevant. They created Tiger Par. They didn't have par. They created Tiger Par. So when he was a kid, he was playing par 7s and par 8s and things like that. And you know, if you're playing a par 8 and you shoot 7, you feel good about it. You know, rather than, oh, I'm so far away from being able to make par and all the rest of it. If your perception of the game isn't giving you what you want, change that perception. You know, maybe you make your own par up, or maybe you make up that the game that you're going to play today is Super 6. You're going to play 6 sets of 3, or you know, 6 different games that you're going to play, or you know you're maybe going to play a game where it's see how many greens I can hit in regulation. It's if you're entrenched with certain results, those results are because of your perception of the game that you're playing. And as I say, if that perception is holding you back, it's all we're making it all up anyway. You know, the objective reality is that you're going out on a big field with some implements in your steel sticks in your hand, and you're hitting pieces of rubber around a big field. That is the reality of it. What we've decided collectively that means is a sort of group hypnosis. You can decide to come out of that trance if it's not working for you, and create another trance that might be beneficial. So, you know, the long and short of that is that, you know, make up something that works for you rather than being hamstrung by something that clearly isn't.
That's a good point. I mean, I think there's that. You mentioned something else, I think, in one of the lessons in the app, which is around the, you know, imagine the worst thing that could happen. Like, you know, you go and shoot 150.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, after a couple of hours, does it really matter? Yet we put so much emphasis on the outcome. And the last couple of questions that we've got. One is, well, we'll finish on I'll do the other one last because it's a bit more, I'm interested in your answer. But currently, how do you feel about, this is a bit divisive, but the whole world of YouTube, you know, and the little grin says it all. But, you know, how do you know, you've obviously been in the game for years and years, and you've worked with some of the best players in the world, you've worked with amateur golfers, but how do you feel kind of the whole immediacy of YouTube swing instruction, all that sort of stuff, you know, what's the state for golfers?
Yeah. Well, that's a loaded question, I think.
I know you well enough, Karl, now to give you that whole question.
I mean, on the one hand, I'm sort of a generation that, you know, to become well known in golf, you either had to be very good at golf, you had to produce low scores, or you know, you perhaps had to have coached some good players who've done well. The world that we're in now doesn't have that requirement. You know, you can become very well known for other reasons, and on the one hand, that baffles me. But on the other hand, I've a great deal of respect for these guys who've gone out on YouTube and built amazing businesses and taken opportunity with it and all the rest of it. I genuinely have 100% respect from that. It's not a world that I grew up in. It's not a world I'm probably that familiar with. That said, then, I think the amount of information that there is there, because I think YouTube's this voracious thing where novelty is the thing that gets clicks, isn't it? And it gets information out there. I think from a golfer's perspective, I think there is some fantastic good coaching out there on YouTube with some really, really good concepts. And I think I would say for everybody, if you're going to look at YouTube, look for key concepts rather than positions. You know, concepts like Adam Young with the big three, concepts like you know, how the club interacts with the ground in the short game and things like that. I think concepts like that are brilliant, that you can fill in the pieces. But I think if you get drawn into this is how you should start the downswing and this is how you should do the backswing and all the rest of it, and you know, one move and you'll never slice again and all this kind of stuff. And I think that's the other downside of YouTube, and is whereby YouTube is presenting the idea that your problems are going to be over forever. And you know, the one thing that we can be certain of with golf is that that's not going to be the truth. Whatever it is, the chaos of the game is always going to be there. So again, it baffles me in many ways, certain things that become popular. But I think for all of us realizing it's not going to go away, it's not going to change. It can be good in some respects, but I definitely say look for concepts rather than swing positions or secrets.
Okay. And so I've actually got two questions. One, how do you, this is a sort of a two-part question as well. Firstly, how do you feel? And then how would you respond to someone when you still hear that the mental game's just a load of nonsense?
It's strange that this far down the line that we're even having the conversation, really, I suppose. I think psychology, like a lot of things, has been done very badly in the past. I think, you know, the sort of positive thinking idea and just believing yourself and all these cliches have probably been more detrimental than beneficial. You know, guys like Raymond Pryor, genuinely learned people like that. It's about really understanding what your brain's up to, and you know what is driving your brain. That's so important that you understand. But for me, Ben, it comes back to this key thing that we keep going on about week after week with the Mind Caddie, is that to get better at golf, you've got to develop skills. And you know, to develop skills, whether we like it or not, your brain's going to be involved in that. Your brain is driving the whole thing to help you solve those skills. But then if you've developed skills and you're not accessing those skills, if there's a big gap between your potential and your performance, if there's a big gap between what you know you're capable of and what comes out on the golf course, more and more lessons and theories and clubs and all the rest of it isn't going to do it. You know, it largely comes down to how is your brain perceiving the game of golf. And if your brain is perceiving the game of golf as a threat, you'll get a threat response in your mind-body system, and that's going to affect your ability to coordinate movement. So I think the problem with people who dismiss it, you know, they dismiss the mental game. You know, it's the sort of same issue as saying it's all in the mind. Those people who say it's all in the mind when it isn't all in the mind, you've got to develop skills. But by just thinking it's all about work on your swing and I'll get to that mind stuff later, you're just missing a massive part. And you know, we're obviously biased with this, but I just think it's such an interesting area to think, how can I be? I'd say that you know, for people listening, ask yourself, what's your relationship with your brain? And that's a really strange question. What's your relationship with your brain? And I think most people's relationship with the brain is they're at war with it. They're at war with the thoughts that they get. They're at war with the feelings that they get. And when you can realize genuinely what your brain's up to, and you can become more friends with your brain, then I think, well, then we can ask the other question: what's possible? Because I think the vast majority of people have got so much untapped potential and so much more ability than they've ever recognized, but they've been held back because they're in a battle with the brain rather than the brain. You know, it's kind of like Fred Shoemaker said, you know, do you have a mind, or are you your mind? And I think people identify so much with the thoughts that they have. And when you can start to realize, you know, we get into deep territory, when you can realize that It's not about necessarily changing your thoughts, but changing your relationship to your thoughts and understanding what your brain's up to. I think, why don't, doesn't everybody think, why don't we just give it a go? I think it's a noble quest, wherever you are, with whatever it is, to just think, do you know what would I like to do with golf? Now, that doesn't have to be winning club championships or lowering scores. It could be playing different courses or, playing with different people, whatever. But just think what could be possible, and then genuinely give it a go and see what you could achieve.
And that actually perfectly leads into my last question, which is, if you were to give any golfer who's thinking about getting into the mental game, because again, for some data, we know that a lot of people who come through to Mind Caddie just want to explore it. What's the one thing you would say, go do this to get started, to work on your mental game?
I would say the first thing is that we've got the fundamentals program in the app. Just go there, and what that fundamentals program will do will give you a much more a better understanding, hopefully, of how your brain's operating and what it's doing, and how it's actually working for you rather than against you when you really understand it. And then, from there, get curious. And I'd say then get curious about your skills. I think everybody should do I'll do this with players at the beginning of the season. I'll do a skills inventory, and we'll sit down and say, right, what specific skills would make a difference to my golf this year? And skills are very different than swings, in the sense that instead of just working on your swing, what's a specific skill? Well, a specific skill would be maybe pace control between 10 and 30 feet, or a specific skill would be straightforward chip shots just off the green that you maybe cost you a lot of shots last year, or a specific skill would be, can you move it a certain way off the tee or whatever, but really drilling down a specific skill like your ability to deal with poor shots. I think the more you get into skills, then once you've got into the Mind Caddie, and we'll keep, reinforcing this all the time. Again, I think some amazing things can happen when you focus on developing skills, not just working on swings.
Very good. Well, that was enjoyable, Karl. That was quite nice interviewing you.
Different.
Basically, yeah, just get an insight myself, which is great. So, well, that's episode 400. Everyone can relax. Karl will be back on 401 hosting. It won't be me again. So, but thank you, Karl, as always, for your time, and I hope people got some useful stuff out of that.
My pleasure, Ben. A lot of fun. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mind Caddie.